Good evening, everyone. It's very nice to be back in this room again, and this time with David, who I think has done very well to take on the responsibility of running this extremely important organization, and whom I think is doing, I've seen some of his data and his outputs, I think he's doing an absolutely great job. So it's nice to be here with you. While we see whether it's possible at all to have the numbers that I was going to show you this evening return, I'm familiar with them, so I can speak without the aid of them on the screen around me. A project I began to run about 2 years or so ago, when I left the IRR, was a request on the part of a few clients to produce much higher quality political information than had been available in the country to date. Unlike the United States and Europe, the quality of the political data in South Africa is very weak. There are occasional surveys and the like. We started polling quite extensively, and initially that was supplied to a very small, it's returned, to a very small readership of about 3 or 4 people. And they read it and felt that this was something that was changing their perceptions of the society. And they were influential people. And we got, I'd say a year or so back, to a point where we had a readership of about 20 people. And the 20 were good. Party leaders, heads of the embassies, business leaders, that sort of thing. And they suggested that we make more of this publicly available. I didn't want to get back into the sort of cut and thrust of the mainstream media because the quality is so appalling in our press. So with some reservations, we created the Social Research Foundation as a more publicly accessible group. It's got a website. We publish our reports and data there. We don't go out fighting in the media. The numbers are what they are. And I was introduced, there was skepticism about surveys. It's place skepticism that. And still I think the best comment on surveys broadly was made by Sarah Palin when the McCain campaign was crashing. She was the running mate of John McCain. And it was collapsing, it was catastrophic, and it was revealed that in picking Palin, the McCain campaign had made a terrible mistake. And she was confronted by a journalist that said, what about the polls? Polls showed this collapse, and Palin said, polls are for strippers and skiing. And that, but they proved to be quite correct. The context to what I'm going to show you numbers really this evening and introduce you to them. And we've got such a lot. We've now literally got hundreds of thousands of data points on voter behavior in the country. We don't understand all of it. We probably understand about 10% of what we possess. I'm going to show you a little bit of that. The context to it is that something important is happening. That here in the territory of present-day South Africa for 400 years, one player could determine the rules of the game politically and enforce those to a lesser or greater extent on everybody else. That era is changing. And in a future South Africa, no single political actor will be able to do that again. We're probably going to end up in a position where the largest political party's got about 1/3 of the vote, Africanist, rural, older demographic. Second biggest is going to have 1/4 to 1/3, cosmopolitan, urban, aspirant, emerging and established middle class. About 10 or 15% will be the Marxist left. And the balance, which will be the kingmakers, will be small, splinter, ethno-nationalist, quite conservative, some truly right-wing political movements who will make up the balance. And in that, we're simply becoming a country where the politics reflects the fragmentation of the people. And had at any interval in the last 400 years, South Africa's people been able to elect their government, they would have elected something that would approximate this kind of fragmentation. It doesn't mean something's gone wrong in our political system. We are a PR system in a fundamentally free society of a very diverse population. This is the inevitable result. The fact that the ANC was dominant for the last 25 years is an anomaly that comes out of the apartheid era and was always going to end when lived experience of apartheid as an influence faded in favor of new social and economic stresses, which has happened. I see my data comes and goes, so let's see what happens. To give you a sense of things, and there's a lot here, and I'll send it all to the FMF guys and they can share some of it with you. Just to give you a bird's eye view, 41 million adults in the country. 26 million of those are registered to vote. Last time, 2019, 18 million of those voted. So have in your minds the idea that 1.8 million, let's say 2 million voters are 10% of the electorate, and how we move those 2 millions around through this evening gives you a sense of who's winning and losing elections. 10 million of the 26 and of the 18 million who voted for the ANC. 2 million voted for the EFF, 4 million voted for the DA, and 2 million voted for other opposition parties that were essentially not ANC and EFF, although the distinctions here are sometimes more complex. So the way the game starts, if you have a view of the ANC and the EFF in one camp and something else in another, is 12 plays 6. And on these units of 2 million votes, we've got to move those numbers around to see who's going to win the next election. To give you some idea of that, there's this segmentation of the registered voter base. Now remember what registered voters are. They're the 41 million adults, 26 million registered, 18 million vote. Of the 26 million who registered to vote, we wanted to categorize them into groups that would help us understand them a bit better. So we ended up with availables and in-reaches and peripherals and unavailables. And what we're measuring is essentially one thing. If you're an available, you're a person who likes to hear centrist, pragmatic messaging, moderate, centrist, liberal, Democrat, pragmatic messaging about the importance of a group of political parties coming together to offer an alternative to what has been the one-party dominance of the ANC. When you hear that sort of thing, if I said to you, if I was the leader of a party and I said we should do, well, what us in this room mostly, I'm familiar with some of you, not all, we think are sensible things, list them on education or whatever, get the opposition together to do that, you would hear that and think, that's great, that's what I think. That's half of the registered voter base, and that's very fortunate because it could have been very different. We don't have to convince people to believe in sensible ideas, they already do. A third of the registered voter base is in reach of becoming availables. If you as a political party spend a lot of time and money talking to them and convincing them, they'll come across to that category. So 70% of the voter base is now pragmatic, centrist, largely sensible. Peripherals will be very hard to turn. The way they answer many of the questions we've asked them suggests to us that they're dogmatic and they're stuck and they're not going to go for this. And 7.5% are hostile to this idea. They don't like it, they don't like the centrist messaging, they're not going to happen. So off the sort of bat this evening, 70% of the voter market is open to sense and moderation, working together democratically, and 47% actually just loves that when they hear it. Now, let's break that market down, just the availables a bit. So I'll show you some measures of them. Of all the availables, remember the availables are 47% of the 26 million who are registered. Of the available, 75% of them are black, and coloured, Indian and white make up, 10% and below of what is left over. And I will send this to you, David, so people don't have to take too detailed notes. In terms of their age groups, 30 to 39 is the really big market share, and actually over that. So there's an idea in some of the new startup political parties, we'll go get the youth vote. Youth vote's very difficult to get hold of because it's firstly not registered to vote, and then some of these parties say they're going to register people and get them to vote. This is almost an impossible task because a non-registered voter doesn't buy the product. You first got to spend money and time convincing them to register, and then you've got to convince them to vote. Much simpler to market yourself inside the available base, the established voting base, which is what well-drilled and experienced political parties tend to do. And you immediately split the amateurs from the serious guys on the question of whether they're going to get the youth vote. In terms of where these voters reside, 20% live in suburbs, a few in CBDs. Townships is 1/3 of the market, and there's a vast market sitting in traditional rural areas that's waiting to, it's often a bit more conservative than some of the more urban markets. If you ask voters, this is now not just the availables, but overall, I'm sure, Gabriel, all. Gabriel is, if you haven't met him, he's my assistant in this, and he does a lot of the work on this, and put this briefing together for me this afternoon. If you say to the availables, what are the most important things that this sort of future government would need to do for you to be happy with it? The top issue they cite is jobs and unemployment, then crime and security, then corruption, then basic services. It doesn't mean these other things are less important. There's a hierarchy of needs. And then a new one that's popping up that's very dangerous is illegal immigration. That wasn't in polling a few years ago. It's now emerging. Blame the other, make a scapegoat, and we can lynch the scapegoat and chase them away, and we'll have full employment. The unimportant issues in the relative order of things are things like racism, the virus was there still, climate change, land reform, public transport. Why the ANC, and I'll show you its numbers, of course, this evening, is being divorced from its voter base, is that it keeps stressing that it will solve these problems for people when it's unable to solve the problems that sit over here. It's not really the things that people want, so it doesn't work politically, no matter how much you play it up in the mainstream media and the like. The public doesn't think these things are not important things, but in the hierarchy of things, those are absolutely critical. And if you cannot now, as an opposition party, cultivate the realistic expectation in the minds of voters that you can solve these things, it'll be very difficult to pull more out of the ANC base than have already departed. On the ANC base, why does it gain and lose support? The data here runs from 94 to 2022. The black pyramid, read off the left-hand axis, that's ANC support in national elections. 63% becomes 70%, and it steps down to the 58% of Mr. Ramaphosa in 2019. On top of that, I put for you per capita GDP, inflation-adjusted per capita GDP. And you should be skeptical of polls, or you should be skeptical of analysts such as myself. But you should try really hard not to believe anything I tell you. And if you can convince yourselves that it's wrong, you're in a good position to take a decision. If, despite trying to not believe it, you find it hard to think that it's probably not real, maybe there's something to it. The ANC in office initially does very well to raise basic per capita GDP. At the same time, I think we've got a chart on this perhaps next, in its first decade in power, it's doubled the number of people with a job. So jobless growth under Thabo Mbeki is nonsense. It was nothing like that. In terms of service delivery, in 94, 50% of families did not have electricity. In 2004, that was down to 20%. 10 formal houses were built for every shack that was newly erected in the first decade. ANC support went up for the deceptively simple reason that life was getting better in the country for the great majority of its people. And all sorts of B-grade rubbish analysts were telling people about liberation era loyalty voting, and ANC voters would never vote for anyone else because they're just voting cattle and they don't really think. The decisions of ANC voters, we've always understood, now we know even better, are perfectly reasoned, logical and sensible in the main. And they take decisions based on material circumstances and their expectations of how those will turn. Yeah, we've got jobs here, in fact. There's ANC support again, from 63 to 70 and down. This little dotted line is the number of people with a job. It starts at 7.5 million. When Mbeki leaves his office, it's sitting at 14 million. It's subsequently sitting at 15 million. 15 years later. And in fact, Mbeki was an interesting guy because here, as he left office, the civil service was no larger than when he'd started. And here it is somewhat larger. And in practice, this last 15 years is 0 net new private sector job creation, which is an astonishing thing to think of. Beneath that line, the blue line with the big blue dots, that's the number of social grants paid every month. They started off at 2 million. When Mbeki left, they were 12 million. The grant rollout slowed, and now grants taken off. That's the 350 Rand grant. If you test grants amongst ANC voters, they resent the grants. They're dependent on the grants, but they're not grateful to the ANC for the grants. Grants have become a problem for the ANC, because voter perception is this all that you do for us? 350 Rand a month. This is the liberation struggle, what it was worth. So on the campaign trail now, unless you come across a particularly ill-informed politician, you won't see people stand on the stage saying, we will give more grants, because the audience would react unfavorably. This is the National Direction of Travel Indicator. I showed you from 2018 as Mr. Ramaphosa is at the height of his Ramaphoria, and I showed you into March of this year. And what it measures, it's the net position between the share of people who think the country is moving in the right direction and the share of people who think the country is moving in the wrong direction. So it starts off at -40, which is catastrophic. When I started as a young analyst about 2004, this was a positive number. Ramaphosa manages for a time to hold the number at -40. He just holds it and holds it. And there's this kind of hope, which many of us sitting in the IRR at the time, we didn't share at all and made us very unpopular, that he's not a reformer. And through the pandemic and subsequently, confidence in the future of the country has collapsed to an amazing extent. So -70. This stuff isn't always directly comparable around the world, but there is no state in a free society, no administration that can survive negativity of these depths. It's to say if we remain a free society, the ANC's time in office is done. On Mr. Ramaphosa himself, this is his favorability score. So it's quite complicated how this is created, but we ask people, do they feel warm or cold about him? And we ask them to indicate the extent of that. And coming into Ramaphoria, he was very strong. He sits at about 60 points. But the spell is being broken, and he's falling away very quickly. And he's sitting at around 40 points at the moment. And the ANC is much more popular than this. I think, have we got other political leaders in this show tonight? Okay. Give you a relative sense of things. The most popular opposition leader in the country in March was Helen Zille. She was at 25. Second was Julius Malema. He was at 24. Third was Musi Maimane at 23. Herman Mashaba was at 14. Malema must have been at 12. No, he was up there. Who was it? Someone else was at 12. John Steenhuisen was at 12. And Paul Mashatile, who's in the line of succession in the ANC, also did terribly badly. Nowhere near anything of this nature. But within the ANC itself, and remember, these are the diehards who've remained in the party to vote for it. Lots have departed. Ramaphosa is 59, at the moment. But Mashatile inside the ANC is 14. So Ramaphosa's popularity is immense. Most people don't like their politicians. And so even our opposition guys in the 20s aren't doing that badly at all, actually. But Ramaphosa's 59 in the ANC is holding the ANC at its present levels. And he will one day go. And the guy taking over is orders of magnitude lower than him. So the personality effect that's holding the ANC up is one of the things that we know is going to be removed. And we might even show you this evening some of the modeling that's been done on what happens in an election after Ramaphosa goes. And the data is quite amazing. Now, this is also amazing. This is word association around political parties. Now, there's a lot of it, so stick with me and follow the little red dot. What essentially happens is we say to people, forget who you vote for and like and don't like, just clear your mind. But we're going to put a word or a phrase to you, and we want you to tell us which political party you thought of. So I'll do some of these for you. Best at providing service delivery. 32% of registered voters said that's the ANC. But 36% said it's the DA. They're beating the ANC on this at the moment. The EFF at 12, ASA at 4. Best at clean governance, the DA wins. Best at working in coalitions, ANC and DA, neck and neck. They're both on 29. Which party has good policies? The DA beat the ANC even on that one. Provides good leadership, the DA is ahead. Provides accountability, the DA wins. Which party's racist? The EFF won that one at 35. The DA was at 26. Which party breaks its promises? The ANC got 73. And the EFF very low, which is right, because the EFF doesn't break its promise. Tells you exactly what it will do if it's in government. It never changes the message. People believe it. Let's go to only cares about themselves, the ANC at 55. Spreads hatred, it's the EFF at 51. Violent, it's the EFF at 70. That's why the EFF can't break well above 10% of the vote, because its brand is violence and anarchy in a moderate society. ANC fatally wounded, because its brand is corruption and incompetence and lies and betrayal and total uselessness. And it can't get out of that again, because it can't replicate the rates of growth that it secured in the first 10 years that brought about the improvements in living standards that saw its support rise, if you recall the early graphics, from 63 to 70%. And then anti-poor, the ANC wins with 40%, the EFF and the DA at 20. Something else that strikes you, we're going to get to what the parties have, but the DA is polling consistently on our numbers at 24, 25. But it's at 36 on that one. It's on 30 on all the others. So something is, there's a short circuit somewhere that the DA has, and it's a bit of a proxy here for the broader opposition. It mustn't just be credited to the DA. The very important milestone, it's an immense battle to convince the public that the alternatives are better. That battle has already been won, was well on the way. It has been, on the numbers it's won. Has already been won by the broader opposition. They haven't yet translated that into an electoral advantage or sufficient one. Why? Here, message testing. So we test messages, things politicians might say, see what everyone thinks of them. The DA will bring back apartheid, and you can agree strongly with that or somewhat or disagree strongly. Black, all voters, about, what would that be, 35% or so, agree that DA will bring back apartheid. Amongst black voters, the figure's over 50%. Disagree strongly amongst black voters, the figure sits at about just over 25%. Now this, I'll explain what's going on here, because it's very complicated. But first point is, in the black voting bloc and also in the ANC bloc, time and time again appear 25 to 30% of voters who answer questions in the same way that a DA voter would answer the same question. They wouldn't see themselves as DA supporters, but they are indicating all strong support for the same ideas and values that motivate DA voters to vote. We focus group as well, in addition to polling directly, and the focus group stuff on this suggests that bring back apartheid doesn't mean apartheid as it was. It means instead that there's a perception that the DA creates an insider-outsider dynamic where it governs. A great life for the insiders, and then around that is a periphery of people who commute into that inside circle to work or so on. The periphery might be better than where the ANC governs. But the perception is such that at a certain level, the demand is almost to vote for an echo of a colonial administration. And many voters find that difficult to do. It's a hard thing to do. The DA makes it hard for them to come across. They show the willingness to come across. DA makes it difficult. If you look in the, let's do the same, bring back apartheid, we've got availables and in reach and peripherals. Amongst the, you can see why peripherals are peripheral, because DA will bring back apartheid gets very, very strong. It's not the only question we use for this. We use a whole battery of questions to determine a peripheral or an available. But inside the available base, only a third hold that view. And remember, the available base is 47% of all registered voters, and of those, 73% are black voters. So this, you know, hoary old kind of cliche is a real problem inside the DA to address. It's not just a passing thing. A second reason making it very difficult to whittle reluctant ANC supporters out of the ANC is what we see here. If the ANC loses, there will be violence and anarchy in society. And agreeing strongly with that is 40% of all voters, and of available voters, roughly the same, and in-reaches and peripherals. And I don't know, do we put up, we don't put up the ANC, but the ANC figure, I think, for this is 50% or higher. The analogy we like to use is that ANC voters are a bit like a person in an abusive relationship. There might have been a courtship that was good, and then there might have been a wedding, and might have been very nice, and initially there might have been a great era of happiness, a honeymoon, and then after that, successes. Because for 10 or 15 years, the ANC governed South Africa much better than it was ever given credit for. And life got better, and ANC support rose. And then the relationship began to sour. And in focus groups that we've done, ANC voters actually planted the idea in my mind that it's like a woman in an abusive relationship. And anyone in that position, if you've ever had sort of experience of trying to help someone with that, you'll know that in a cold, rational moment, the partner that's being abused will say, I know I need to go. But they stay in the relationship. And they stay in the relationship because the world out there is too alien and hostile, and there's a fear, an actual fear of the consequences of leaving. And in many respects, I think there's about a third of the ANC voter base. That's a third of it's about 15% of the next election, which wants to go but is afraid to leave. And the opposition isn't making it easy for them to go, partly because they're ignorant of this, partly because they don't take seriously enough the previous chart, and partly because when you spend all your time squabbling with each other, you don't instill the realistic belief in the electorate that if you govern, life will become better. So you rather stay inside the ANC. Now, where are all the parties standing? This is 2022 on the raw numbers. We'll later model them for turnout. We had the ANC at 46, the DA at 25, the EFF at 12. If an election occurred and had the same level of voter turnout as what was the case in 2019, the ANC was at 49, DA 25, EFF 12. At 66 turnout, that was 65 turnout. It's essentially the same thing. And at a lower turnout, we had the ANC a little bit higher at 52. The margin of error on this stuff was 1.7%. So the ANC was just hanging on. And there's quite a lot of media. The ANC's done, kaput. I think Herman Mashaba said in an interview today, it's going to get 30%. If it does, then we were very far off on these figures here. We think it's clinging to 50. This is data from March of this year. Raw ANC 46 as opposed to 46. It's just down a fraction of a point. We didn't do 65 turnout. 66 turnout, we've got them at 52. And 56 turnout, we've got them at 53. And the main reason, the DA, we've still got a 25 consistently. We think there's some life going on in Inkatha, and we think ASA has been giving up a little bit of ground, sitting around 3 to 4% at the moment. And after this book fiasco, its DA voters have probably quietly returned to their former home. The reason, we don't know the reason why this figure is a bit up is partly because these things change from day to day, but also likely because the most hopeful thing a voter hears today is the broader opposition saying we will work together, not against each other, to put together sensible, moderate solutions to your problems. And that fills them with hope. It's the most positive thing you can say as a political leader. And they all know it because we've told them this is the thing to say. And they sat at some media conference today and apparently squabbled with each other for the whole hour. It's amazing to see. And therefore, you know, I'll have clients outside of SRF that will say to me, they can't believe the ANC is at 50%, given the lights are off, no water, and general pandemonium. And the answer to them is that for the ANC to lose, someone has to win. That voter has to go somewhere that inspires them. And in this week, if we took this week, what truly inspired a voter who's afraid of leaving to say, I'm crossing the great divide and I'm going to the other? There's nothing there, I would say, that would so inspire you, except in Natal. Inkatha's doing quite well. Here, yeah. Yes, there is a big drop in the EFF. Part of that, you can take, let's say, 2 points off that drop on margin of error questions, and it's not so large anymore. You could also say what Sarah Palin thought, and that polls can get things a bit off. But the scale of the drop read against the flop of the EFF's national stay away and the consequence of the Natal riots and violence, which showed people, reminded them what real violence and riots means. So if you advocate for violent revolution, we did one in Natal, and the poor got absolutely hammered as a consequence. I think these factors have come together to explain that EFF support is off. I don't know if it's off to the extent that we show here. I think we took it down here from what, 12 to 8 and 12 to 6 even. On a turnout modeled one, I think. Yeah. I'd from all this data, the way to use it, be deeply skeptical of it. If we're getting the same trends in the data time and again, you can probably trust that the trend is broadly accurate. So that vast fall in EFF support tells me that the EFF isn't growing, firstly. I'm confident on that. And it's probably losing quite a lot of support. But the full extent of it, we'd have to test time and time and time again, which we do, and we'll see what comes back. There is also another thing. There's a 5% group that bounces between the ANC and the EFF. They bounce on quite like ping pong ball up and down. So we might just have hit the ANC on a bit of a high at 53, might have hit the EFF at a little bit of a low. Then, oh no, we haven't even done this. This is important, because this is the story of this great hope. I want my party to take part in a coalition of all voters, strongly agree is, what's that, 60%. Plus agree, let's give that another 10, it's about 70%. Saying they want this to happen. Of ANC voters, it's astonishing. It's 60% and 10 again. It takes you almost up to 80. And that's important, because why are they saying that? If you were happy with your brand, the service you're getting, the product you're buying, why are you telling a researcher that you would be very keen if this company was taken over or put into some sort of partnership with someone else? It's because those ANC voters are already past the point of no return, and they're busy with this long process. There's a bit of a lag time between experience and political action of getting out, and they would have got out in much bigger numbers if the opposition broadly at its leadership level had its act together as a united front. I'm looking at the numbers, and I spent a lot of time with them. I think that had we seen the broader opposition work together as a united bloc, kill each other behind the scenes if you have to, but not in front of the cameras all the time. If they had done that, and as a consequence had done any good in running Gauteng much better than had been the case for the ANC leadership, I think you could put the ANC down from the 50 we've got there to 40 and heading south from that. And that, you'll see later, might just have been enough to put a coalition government in power. We did test opposition government in Johannesburg specifically. We polled that as the coalitions broke up. And I think 7 in 10 township voters told us they noticed no difference between the government of the coalition and the government of the ANC. And so you know, there's this thing that's sometimes said about the Middle East, never missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And we're well in the throes of that. If you say to voters further, if we now do have coalitions, which parties, which configuration would you prefer? A's are availables, in-reach P's, then provinces and parties and all sorts of things. ANC, DA and EFF gets, G's are the global, the raw number, 14%. The most popular option is ANC and DA together at around 31%. For availables, that's 36%. Inside the DA base, look at that, it's 55% of DA supporters say that's the coalition deal we most want. Inside the ANC base, the most popular at a third is ANC EFF. But 23% said ANC DA and EFF, while 21% said ANC and DA. So you've got 44% of ANC voters who say we would like to see the DA in a coalition. It's the reason this makes some sense on both sides, because for a lot of white voters, I think the idea of this deal with the ANC is in some sense the crossing of some sort of historical Rubicon. To feel that you are fully kind of invested in South Africa and truly belong, and that the colonial guilt which attaches to a lot of people, whether they admit it or not, is somehow assuaged. In the ANC camp, there's the perception that the ANC is completely useless, but the DA governs better. So if we can get the DA into a camp with us, maybe that will help us in order to govern the country better in the longer run. What this shows overall, though, that we can't get any one of these much over a third, means that the voting public is wide open, even inside the ANC base, is wide open to party configurations that are put to it and that are where the voting public can be convinced that these configurations will deliver services to us. This option, the moonshot concept is a wide open market for someone to seize upon. More message testing. There's a misconception that Cyril isn't a reformer and the ANC can't introduce reforms and no future government can, because ANC voters are hardline, dogmatic, stuck on certain policies and will never surrender them. Now that's wrong. The question is, and we'll develop this one a bit further on subsequent graphics, BE helps my community. A quarter of all voters say that that is true. Of ANC voters, it's now under, say, agree strongly, it's under 50%, plus agree somewhat takes us to 50%. But disagree somewhat for the ANC, sitting at about 10, that would be, plus this at 30, means that inside the ANC, the idea of BE splits 50-40. It is much closer fight than is broadly understood. Is a black leader essential to run a political party? Amongst all voters, agreeing strongly and agree together gets you to just about 50%. Amongst ANC voters, it gets you to just under 70%. But here again is that 1/3 of the ANC base that on something as important as this say that they strongly disagree that that's important. And if you were to think like a DA strategist, you might say, look, this is going to be very difficult to swing this crowd over. But here you've got a crowd that's already swung over. And if you can crack them and bring them into the broader opposition camp, they are 15% of the next election. and it's a game changer, but they sit inside the ANC base. And once that flow starts, it will be, you will see others start to join it. And the point of all of it is that the electorate is not hardcore race nationalist dogmatic in the main. It is much more open to alternative ways of structuring government and policy than, in my experience, a lot of business leaders and even a lot of politicians understand. Here we stay with the BE question. Now we ask it slightly differently. And the whole question, if you read the whole thing, goes along the lines that, the ANC can lose support and one day we'll have to get into a coalition government. And one of the conditions of the ANC joining that coalition might be that it agrees to give up on BE. If it was forced to do that to join the coalition, would you support that or would you oppose it? And a third say they would support it strongly of all voters. The same, a third of ANC voters say they'd support that strongly. And 10% of ANC supporters say they'd support that strongly. So you get to about 45 or so, while about the same 45, approaching 50 of ANC voters say they'd oppose it. And that's a remarkable point to reach for the society where an issue like this, which is such a specific way of capturing some of the racial nationalist dogma that was part of the victory over apartheid, that supporters of the ruling party at this point would be prepared to say that we will give that up if we have to. This is a much more open-minded electorate than the lazy B-grade media analysis sometimes suggests to one. Stay with a similar theme, but ask it differently. This is now much more of an action statement. This is much closer to your lived experience. There'll be this coalition, the ANC joins it again, and so on. One of the conditions of joining is the ANC has to give up on race-based affirmative action appointments in the civil service. Would you support that? Strong support is 60% for all. It's about 50-something for the ANC, plus this 10 or 15 means we've got ANC support on this, I think sitting at about 65% or so. The reason for that is that poor people live where they confront an inept civil service for so many of the things that they need to get through the day, where I don't. I get my passport from my bank with a cappuccino and an appointment. I the best medical care in the world that South Africa still provides. My experience of the civil service is very, very limited. If you're dependent on it, you're much more critical. And it suggests that that early stuff on BEE is actually the tip of something. And the flip side of the BEE question wasn't to say you abandon BEE in favor of laissez-faire libertarian economics and fend for yourself, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, get a hold of yourself. The flip side of that is that the public is open to alternative models of empowerment policy that would achieve the same effect of essentially using state policy and state resources to accelerate the progress of poor people into the middle classes. That would, if the first opposition party to come up with a really compelling, doesn't mean in your own policy conference, really compelling model of that, has a market here to capture that's absolutely vast. Another one of testing the dogma, support employment without the minimum wage. 40% of all say yes, of ANC it's the same, it's 50% in total, and it splits in the ANC 50-50 directly on the question of the minimum wage. And another one of those big policy victories over apartheid, the labor regulatory environment, that you will not again be abused by a colonist. 30 years on, public opinion is willing to give up a key element of that in the expectation that it might create a better and more prosperous society. Then Ramaphosa should lead a breakaway party. This was done for all registered voters. We don't think he will. He won't lead a break. The last thing he'll do is lead a breakaway party. He'll try to unite this party. But we asked this to detect something else. 60% of ANC voters said that would be a great idea. Now that is quite something. And disagreeing in the ANC, what would that be? That's about 10 plus 20. 1 in 3 ANC voters would oppose the idea of the great reformer saying, to hell with the rest of you, I'm leading us into the future and we're going to do things differently by making some of these concessions. That shows how far, it's the same point that you've got this yearning in the voter base for something new. The opposition's finding it very difficult. It's almost if you're in business or you sell a product or something, you've got all these consumers who don't like the product they're using. They want something new. But no entrepreneur can seize the market. It's almost impossible, but it's happening in our politics. Then, this is the modeling of the consequences. Okay, so what's happened here is a long, complicated question. But you sort of try and make this real. So there's been all this infighting in the ANC, and Ramaphosa sort of valiantly trying to save the party, and I can't remember how we did it. The RET guys are getting in his way, and so the ANC splits in two. And Ramaphosa gallantly goes on his way. He leads a breakout. He starts a new party, which will save South Africa. And as key ANC leaders join him in that, they sort of line up behind him, and this is new. The faction that remains behind is the sort of Zuma faction of the sort of RET types. Now we're going to have an election, and how are you going to vote if this is the reality? Let's go. Let's start with the ANC. 39% of ANC voters say they're going with Ramaphosa. 35% say they're staying with what they've come to know, and 15% say they're moving on. So this moment is going to be reached for us, where as the Ramaphosa effect is removed, he's removed from the ANC in due course. His successors aren't that popular. The socio-economic trends continue to work against the party. We're going to have a sort of ANC election result where the party's down in the 30s. Amongst all the global figure, 27% vote for Ramaphosa, 25% for what remains of the ANC, 40% for the rest of the opposition. And the availables, 33% go to Ramaphosa. And look at that, 24% are going to stay in the ANC. These are an available market to the opposition. And even after Ramaphosa goes, they're going to stay inside the ANC. And the reason is his inability to create for them a sufficiently compelling alternative to exit. And I think we're getting towards the end here. This is March. Has load shedding caused you to reconsider voting for the ANC? And this is only ANC voters, yeah? 45% say yes and 45% say no, and the ANC knows this because we told them that you're in trouble. And they agree that they're in trouble. And I don't know if I think just on the side and beyond this evening, load shedding I think is relatively easy to solve. Just fix the power plants that are broken and refit coal and you're on your way. But whether that's going to, load shedding is not difficult. And the political opposition gets it so wrong when they say that it's such a difficult challenge to solve. You're just giving Ramaphosa a get out of jail free card. So it's easy to solve load shedding. Just do proper maintenance, put proper coal into coal stations, buy enough diesel for the time being. Lights will be on again. Lastly, Cape Town. I just wanted to add this one in. The demographics, the DA in the Cape wins around 55% of the vote. And it's been edging its way, just not upwards. Let's say it's not rising for the last decade. It seems to be falling a little bit. And I think there's a tactical mistake that's being made by both the ANC and the DA to think that the coloured voters, which is the big demographic split between the ANC and the DA, if one day a new politician arrives that captures coloured opinion, the DA loses the Cape. And there's a very interesting chap by the name of Gayton McKenzie, who I have spent some time with. And people are quick to say it's absurd that McKenzie would try and govern anything. He knows exactly what politics is about. He's working really hard. His understanding of issues, economics, global events, is really good. He loves getting out of bed in the morning to do this. And he he is a factor to bear in mind, because I think, I'd say to you, which, and some of the DA are here this evening, I don't think the DA can on its own hold the Western Cape anymore. And it's going to have to make a deal with the up-and-comers if it wishes to do that. So even everyone's watching the ANC collapse and fall away. And there's a sort of DA jewel in the crown in the Cape, and this idea that that will always remain so. Wouldn't be certain that that's necessarily the case. Yeah, and just lastly, if you take the opposition blocks together, 2019, 66 turnout, and let's do July 22, 66 turnout. Or let's do this one, March 2023, 66% turnout. We had the DA at 24, and we had the rest of the opposition bloc, this is Freedom Front, ACDP, the kind of moderate right of centre opposition, at about 15. So collectively, let's say we put them at about 40%. They're 10 points short. Those 10 points rest in that third of the ANC base that needs to be brought across. If that happens, these guys have a shot at national government. If they don't get that right, then we have other configurations that emerge after this election, the most likely of which is the ANC is back in power, probably in the low 50s, and if we're wrong on that and it's down just below 40, or just above 45, there are a number of proxy parties that it can use, small partners, to get itself back in. So I think the ANC does another 5 years into 2029. We'll revisit all these issues in the 5 years up to that, and that's not a bad thing, and I'll close for you on that. Do not wish for the collapse of the ANC if you don't know what you're going to replace it with. Because we might have one shot at this. And the ANC is not a crazed fascist dictatorship. Its finance minister is pursuing a primary budget surplus. He's not going to get there, but he's trying. He's not printing money. Our political leaders, unlike the Venezuelans, are not in jail. We're not meeting in Hampstead this evening to discuss a fund to get John Steenhuisen out of prison. Those are real problems. Governments that print money to create inflation, to create populism. We don't have that. We have one shot at this because people trust in democracy. And if the government that is brought to power after the ANC's defeat is as hopeless as some of what we've seen from the broader opposition, and there's some amazing people in the opposition, very good people in the ANC too, try and govern well. If that's hopeless, people will lose their confidence in democracy, which they currently have in great measure. And if they lose their confidence in democracy, they can be swayed to populism. So even if the ANC still has a run, a term, who knows, maybe another one in power, don't try and stampede it out of power when you don't know what you're going to replace it with. David.
Frans,
Thank
you very much. So we'll now go to questions from the audience. But I think to your last point, Frans, we don't often quote Marxist thinkers at the Free Market Foundation. But Antonio Gramsci, who was writing from prison in fascist Italy in the 1920s, he wrote that the old is dying, but the new cannot yet be born.
No.
In this interregnum, a variety of morbid symptoms appear. And I think that's a very apt description of where South Africa is at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'll hand over to the audience. I think we'll just take one question at a time. If you could please introduce yourself, keep your question short and to the point. No soapboxing, please. But yeah, over to you.
Thanks.
Herman.
Yeah, thanks. One. Frans, when you spoke about those voter segments, right? You started by saying of the registered voters, 18 million voters, 70%, and then you spoke about the available, the in reach, and so on and so forth. Was that of the 26 million, or was that of the 18?
Of the 26.
And okay, so within those segments, is there more of an inclination to vote, to actually show up on some of those segments?
No. Non-voters are very interesting because people tend to think that they're morons, and they're not. They're making a rational decision. So we focus group non-voting, trying to understand what it is. And so you'd have a group of people who don't vote, and you say, how do you think things are going? And they say, terribly, terribly. And you say, are you going to vote again? And they say, never. and you say, well, when will you vote again? And they say, when things get better. And you then say to them, do you not think there's short circuit here somewhere? And they say there is. Of course there is. But they have a very good answer. They say, when I vote for someone, you're asking me to seriously believe in them and trust them to make things better. And I'm not prepared to do that again, because the politicians, which isn't true of all politicians, are so hopeless that I won't try. That's why one of the points I made this evening was to say that for the opposition to win, they need to cultivate the realistic belief, not the hope, distant, wandering, take a chance, the realistic belief that if I vote for this group of parties, my life will get better. And the theatre on which to have demonstrated that ahead of 2024 was Gauteng. And it hasn't been demonstrated. So those voters stick behind. So you can get them out, turn out, but you're not going to argue the case with them and they're going to come out. They're going to see that life's getting a bit better, and then they're going to turn out.
I guess what I was also trying to get at is amongst that 57%, does it sway more so to the availables, or does it so that segmentation that you gave, does that actually map its way out across the people who actually vote?
I don't know sitting here before you, but I'm confident enough to tell you that the people who vote are the most positive, upbeat people in the country. And the ones that stay away are those that are the most kind of down, which is why they don't vote. So there'd be it would split in some respects. Yes. I see. Are you?
Mike and then Sherwin. We can actually take groups of 3 questions.
No, do one, because I forget about the other 2.
And then we'll go to Sherwin.
Thanks. It's Mike Satis, also from the free market. I think you actually answered the first question already. But, the second question is, given Cyril's popularity amongst the populace, do you think the ANC will abandon him post-2024 or keep it up?
No, keep him. ANC, they'll abandon him. Yeah. Yes.
Sure.
Frans, thanks for telling us what South Africans think. I'm interested to know what should South Africans do. More interesting in terms of
I think in the control room at Eskom are really expert people. And as long as they continue to have, which they do, the government support to turn off large parts of the country when the signs of danger are there, then we're not going to have a grid collapse. Just on that, 1 minute on that, there shouldn't be load shedding, because there are several stages of potential production just lying around that aren't being utilized because the plant and equipment is simply broken. We don't have a problem of a country that has no energy capacity or needs to build power stations or power lines. We don't do any of that. We can actually, on a 10-year view, without building one power station or a single power line, you might have to fix a few power lines. You've got to fix a lot of power stations. But we can raise current peak daily production from 23 to 45,000 megawatts. And that is enough to sustain an industrially driven economic growth rate of 5% just by fixing the stuff that's broken down. Your first part of your question was, what should people do? I mean, you here know what to do, I think. I mean, you should probably do what you think is in your best interests. I'd say on South Africa, if you reasonably hedged around, it's a risky emerging market. That's all that it is. If you are 100% exposed here, then you're running a very high degree of risk, and you should limit your exposure. If you are, if you're talking about the getting involved in trying to solve the problem, you should realize that there are a lot of, as you all do, because we're standing here with David, you should realize there are a lot of people out there who are trying to solve the problem on your behalf. You or many of them. And you should give them a lot of money so that they can be more effective in doing what they already do. And you can get on with doing whatever you do. That's what you should do. Yeah.
Somebody else, funding minimums. Very simple questions, maybe not so simple. One is, could you give us just a flavour of the reaction of the different political leaders that you've put your concepts across? Second one, sorry if I could just run.
Yeah.
Second, perhaps just elaborate a little bit on the huge rural population.
There was solving that
potential swing.
Yeah.
Sorry, and my third one was just there seems to be all sorts of shenanigans going on between the EFF, ANC and Gauteng. That potential education relationship between the two parties.
Let's start with the ANC-EFF deal. A year ago, on our numbers, the DA led the ANC in Gauteng by 1 point, 30 to 29. In March, the ANC led the DA again by 5. And the reason is that the hope that around the DA could be built a constructive coalition was dashed in the minds of many people. And I've mentioned the data on township voters' experiences of the ANC and DA in government. There's often a sense amongst a lot of analysts who say a lot that obviously the ANC and the DA get together because they're largely the same, but it's not as simple as that. Last year, the ANC and the EFF collectively did not have 50% in Gauteng. So if they got together nationally, the broader opposition could deny them Gauteng. Deny the ANC Gauteng now and put it in a pact with the EFF. You achieve two things. You mesh the brand of lying and incompetence and cheating and stealing with the brand of violence and anarchy. As a consequence, you stampede the last of the aspirant middle class out of the ANC camp and towards hopefully the embrace of the opposition. Without that middle class, and with middle class increasingly seeing the ANC as irrelevant, it becomes a regional party, headquartered in Limpopo, Northwest, and in Mpumalanga. And it will host its last policy conference in 20 years' time, like the, whatever party. I was going to say the United Party, but it's not the same. Under a thorn tree on the Botswana border, and it will be done. Now, the better ANC thinkers know that this is a very likely chain of events that is set off by the deal with the EFF. They also know that those EFF chaps are good. They work hard, they're bright, they're determined, they're absolutely ruthless. And this is going to be a reverse takeover. Senior ANC leaders openly say, reverse takeover. They're going to eat us alive. And I say, they'll probably put you on trial for corruption as well, facing some sort of tribunal, in a stadium. It's not far off, And if you're the ANC and you've got to 45, 46, 47%, are you going to invite the most ruthless opponents you've ever had into the camp with you to say, please come and govern with us? And you compete for the same voter market? Or would you actually say, let's look at a smaller partner, or a partner that competes in a different voter market, doesn't directly compete with us, to form some sort of coalition deal? So the automatic, obviously it's ANC EFF, could very easily be, and there's some people around that are dumb enough to do that. If it happens, is it the end of the world? I don't think so. Because the ANC and the EFF in government, merging those two brands and surrendering the middle class, if they ever face another election, they're done. Together, they're going to be down to 30%. To avoid that, they've got 5 years to stop us from having another election, which they may try and do. But doing that is actually quite difficult. You can do it with reigns of terror and all manner of things. It's perfectly achievable. But they will be up against the battle-hardened civil society fresh off the victory of crushing Jacob Zuma's state capture run. And that could be a very well-resourced civil society, and just simply not imagine this doesn't affect us, the result. It's much harder for the ANC and EFF to win that fight than for civil society to halt them enough. You don't have to beat them. Just hold the line of being able to vote in most of the constitutional provisions for long enough that we get to another election. And on the side of the opposition, I've told you what sharp ANC thinkers are thinking. The sharpest opposition thinkers think, bring it on. Let's demonstrate to voters, finally, those vacillating, doubting voters, give them a firm 5-year demonstration of the consequences. And then it will be much easier to bring them across into a broad, centrist, pragmatic opposition, structured somehow by this 30%, 25%, and these little fractious ethno-nationalist parties that I say will come along. I haven't answered your question about how parties respond because I think I'm going to appear on YouTube with this, and I don't want to discuss that on YouTube with them. But if you come and see me for a drink, I'll tell you.
Right, we're going to go to Sebastian at the back, but can we please limit ourselves to one question?
It's Sebastian Chattel from Up on Agent Capital. You mentioned Gates and McKenzie. Can you elaborate a little more on the voting demographic behind him in terms of age, region, gender, and the like, and also in terms of trends, if you'll be able to elucidate any, is he on the up, is he on the down?
Don't know yet. We're testing him at the moment. Great intel in the track of a supersized sample. We'll have that in about
4 weeks' time. We're doing it in order to test this whole Western Cape thesis, that the Western Cape is vulnerable. And if you think from a DA perspective, Western Cape, there's a national assumption, the Western Cape is sort of sorted. And it will be the last sort of refuge. And it will be a great emerging market, which it should be for the next 20 or 30 years. But its politics, I think, is more vulnerable than is understood. To date, he started very small. In which election did he get so many votes? The local one, no. He surged in a local election. I think up to that point, he hadn't really had much of a ground game. He hadn't really been working hard at this, properly on the ground political working. If he begins to do that, then he potentially is very hard to beat in the Cape. And there have been some recent by-election results, I think Swellendam, where if you go look in the Swellendam result, he made an effort at Swellendam, crushed the DA there. So in this world of PR where the biggest parties have 30%, the winner is not going to be the biggest political party anymore. And there's actually some liability in being the biggest party because you've got all sorts of diverse supporters and members making demands. The winner is going to be the best deal makers, to strike deals between and across parties. And that's a lesson that I don't think has yet fully sunk in on any side of the equation.
We'll take the last three questions.
You showed us that during the pandemic there were quite massive changes, especially in the increase in social grants, and that it did affect people's views of politicians. You yourself said that you were very happy for not-vaccinated to be excluded from the restaurant you went to. Given hindsight of the ineffectiveness of the vaccine, do you still hold that view?
Yes, completely hold the view, which I'm sure I did articulate at the time, that non-vaccinated people should be excluded from restaurants at But
I'm very happy for there to be restaurants that change their minds. I would believe the restaurant owner has the say on that. So completely in support of that. Still now, here today. Do I think the lockdowns and the damage that they caused, that was the correct strategy for us? It was a mad strategy because we copied what the Western world was doing without the ability to provide the finance and subsidies for people who were losing their jobs. And as a consequence, greatly exacerbated the damage that was caused by the pandemic.
Ultimate question, yes, sir.
Hi, because
You know, you suggest throughout the presentation that you have a moderate populace and a low, because none of the opposition party has half a brain cell to tap.
So, we do have a moderate populace, and it's very good. And I'm critical of what the broader opposition has done. But that criticism is tempered because there are amazing people in the opposition who go out every day and fight a terrible, I mean, to be a low-level councillor with society collapsing around you is a terrible and stressful job, and you get paid almost nothing to do it. And I'm amazed that anyone would even try. And to lead a political party today with these conflicting forces and all sorts of donor demands, I mean, the whole cross-section that try and do it, I think are heroic in doing so. But I think strategy is not good enough. And that is, I mean, the opposition have saved us as a society from what would otherwise have been a very much worse position. And so too moderates in the ANC camp. I mean, ANC fiscal policy, when what you should expect from any crazed revolutionary movement facing defeat is running the printing presses to create inflation, to create populism, to feed the violence, to destroy the constitution, aren't doing that, even though they know they may lose an election. And those guys are also pretty brave to do that. So I just think strategy in the opposition doesn't work, because there isn't an outcome where I'm going to be the biggest party and determine what happens and you're all going to fall in line behind me. It's going to be deal making, and that's going to be hard deal making. You're going to make deals with people that aren't like you, not different from you, and come from very different backgrounds. But that's going to be how the winners are selected. And yeah.
Right. Last question from that gentleman over there.
Yeah, we're great on making deals. We're just not so great at sticking to them when it comes to coalition.
So you're going to make sensible, you're going to make workable deals as well. And I mean, also, I don't want to, like the other question, I don't want to get into the detail of deals here, but strategy hasn't been phenomenal from anyone. And absolutely, the cross-section of opposition parties, A can say to B, you were the problem and you caused it, and there's no party that can say, I'm squeaky clean and did nothing at all. But we've got to get past this to, statesman-like leadership here, because it's on their own. None of them are going to outperform, but together, collectively, they could. And yeah, but we might have another 6 years to perfect this before the ANC is finally displaced.
Very much, Frans. I think that it's always good to see what the numbers say, not just speculate and regurgitate what we read in the newspaper on a Sunday morning, and actually find out what South Africans think. But I think the comment from Sherwin there, what South Africans do when it comes to how they behave in the ballot box, I think will be really determining of our future. But I think I'm greatly encouraged by the fact that South African voters vote according to their interests. They just need to make the correct calculations. But I wanted to express our gratitude on behalf of the Free Market Foundation.
That's very good.
It's been great to deliver.
Thank you.
And I'm very pleased to see a full house here tonight. We also had about 500 people watching live on YouTube. So if you're watching at home and you live in Gauteng, you're more than welcome to come through to our offices the next time we host an event. But Frans, keep up the good work, and we will watch the run-up to 2024 with great interest.
Yes, good. David, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.